Hello and welcome to another episode of Tory Talks. I'm Sam. This is
Morning, I'm Ian.
and together we are Tory Talks. Sorry for the break that we had between filming, but I've got to be honest, my mental health has been completely and utterly shot through lockdown, so we decided to have a little break for me to get my act together and put my big girl pants on. So that's why we've had a bit of a break. And we are not going to be doing any sort of like jovial show and tells or anything because we've got a lot to cover this morning. So
Some weighty matters.
we're going to start with one that's particularly sensitive and hope that we come out the other end okay. But we're going to be discussing the Black Lives Matters protests is what they're
Yeah, protests,
yeah,
yeah.
peaceful protests, obviously, during lockdown. So let's get straight into it. Ian, your thoughts?
Okay, so obviously anybody that follows me on social media will know that I'm not a fan of the protests, and I'm not a fan of the protests purely because of the timing. And I was quite disappointed that the council in Ipswich, anyway, kind of like were condoning the protests. I thought it was a very difficult position for them to be in. Obviously, it's always difficult to try and stamp on protest. You always want to allow people the right to voice their opinions. But I think I had an issue with the timing. I certainly had an issue with the timing. The sentiment of the movement, I agree with wholeheartedly, 100%. I'm not a great fan of protest movements like this because they so often get hijacked by an unruly element, which kind of like takes away from what the protest is actually about, and that does seem to have happened a lot. Thankfully, it didn't happen in Ipswich, and there was a really peaceful protest in Ipswich that was, certainly the pictures I saw, social distancing was maintained, but it still doesn't get across the fact that there was mass gatherings of many hundreds of people in the park, which I don't think the council should have been condoning. I mean, that's really two different things. I have been, I'll be brief, but I mean, I was attacked on social media for my opinion there, and called racist myself. And that is one of the problems with this, is that if you don't 100% agree wholeheartedly with everything, you tend to get attacked. And that is why I think it's quite important to do something like this Tory Talks, because it's important to get across the fact that, just because you don't share how they're doing it doesn't mean the values aren't the same. I've got the same values as everybody that was probably on those protests yesterday, but I don't necessarily believe that the council lighting up a building with an empty gesture is the best way to go about enacting change, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably taking a harder line on this one than you, which is a bit of a surprise. But I completely and utterly am against this protest. I'm not a fan of protests anyway. You'll probably hear me speak out against all protests. Definitely was very hard line when it comes to Extinction Rebellion and what they were doing. I didn't agree with that at all. I'm not necessarily sure whether protesting is the right way to go about things. And particularly now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's really really infuriated me actually that this has gone ahead. Yes, I agree that with you that the core purpose behind this is to recognize that racism does happen, it does exist. We know it exists. I mean, we're probably shielded to a degree because we're both white, so we might not necessarily see it because we don't experience it, though I have had an experience of racism in the past. I used to live in an area in Plumstead, and my next door neighbour used to make pig noises every time we left the house. But if you say that, someone says, well, it's not racism because you're white, but it kind of is. The problem is, it wasn't so long ago, as in a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that leading figures in the BAME community were on the news asking us to take the BAME community away from frontline services because they're more likely to die from coronavirus. And there was a fear about the disproportionate amount of deaths when it comes to our BAME community and coronavirus. And then all of a sudden, we're throwing this completely out of the window. And not only are we forgetting that, we're now having groups of thousands of people in London, hundreds of people in our hometown, who are probably at the most vulnerable out in big groups of people, and we've forgotten that a pandemic is actually happening. And I'm infuriated by it, and I think that it's really, really reckless for the leaders of the communities to be encouraging that, because when the spike happens and more deaths happen, who is going to be to blame for this?
Well, look, I'm in agreement, and I suppose my sentiments are a little bit more that this movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, has been around for some time, okay, and has done some good work over the years that it's been in existence, of bringing things to the forefront of people's minds. Because you're right, we probably don't experience it like other people may, but this whole uprising, as it were, which we're seeing in the States. People are saying all around the world, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen much from all around the world. I don't know if it is all around the world, but anyway, is more to do with police brutality. The States suffers a horrendous problem with police brutality, and has done for many years. And yes, do you know, the statistics do show that that blacks probably have more police brutality against them than other races. I suppose, you know me, I'd like to think I'm what other people want the society to be, because I don't actually see race. So when I saw the horrendous pictures of that policeman kneeling on George Floyd's neck and him screaming out that he couldn't breathe, I was as horrified as everybody else. But I saw two people. I didn't see it being a race issue, because only a few weeks previously exactly the same had happened with a white person.
Yeah.
I saw it as police brutality. Now, I don't think there's any inference by anybody that there was any race element involved in this horrendous murder, which is what it is. It's a murder. It was a murder of somebody by a policeman. And in the States, and kind of that's been jumped upon by the Black Lives Matter movement, and I feel that they perhaps lose some of their voice by the fact that almost they're protesting for the same thing in this country. But you know, it's undoubted we don't have the police brutality in our country that we have in the States. No. We don't have the issues like they have in the States. That doesn't mean. Now, the problem is that when you say that, you automatically get accused of being racist. Oh, you're saying there isn't a problem. No, it's not. Saying one, and that's the problem with these arguments sometimes, saying one thing doesn't mean that another thing has to happen or another thing can't be true. We know there's racism in the country. I don't think it's institutionalized. I don't think it's endemic. We're lucky to live in a part of the country where there is there's hardly any racism, but that's not saying it's not there. And I think that what these protests did is make, Ipswich is a very, very calm town. And to be honest, there are issues in the BAME communities which affect them on a day-to-day basis. And I personally don't think that race is the top of that list. I don't even think that racism is in the top 3 issues that afflict the BAME community. I think, and I know apparently we're not allowed to say the term all lives matter, because that means you're racist and you don't understand Black Lives Matter. But you know what? Those pompous people that say that, they're part of the problem. Because actually, do you know what? Hundreds and hundreds of young black kids are murdered on our streets each year through county lines and drugs. And this is when Black lives should be mattering to me, not when a man who lives 4,000 miles away is horrendously murdered, and it doesn't really have anything to do with our country. Black lives do matter, of course they do, but they don't matter more when, and this is going to sound awful, they don't matter more if the person killing somebody was white. If Black Lives Matter, then they should always matter, and we should be looking at all the issues that affect those communities, not just making out that race affects them disproportionately more than anything else. Because if we got rid of all racism tomorrow, which would be wonderful, but isn't going to happen, unfortunately, there would still be issues within those communities, and there would still be big issues. So, of course, I think it's important, but I think the message is lost with the timing of it, and they're concentrating too much on things that happen thousands of miles away that actually are being dealt with. I mean,
yeah, he was originally charged for, was it third-degree murder? It's now been increased to second-degree murder. They've obviously got they've got a different system, haven't they, in America? But he was the police officer who was at the front, because I think there was 3 or 4 police officers that were actually sitting on him. But the police officer who was on the neck, he was charged, and due process is happening.
So can I say that the others have been charged now as well? And
okay.
A little aside to add is the fact that obviously they have completely different laws in America. They have federal, state laws. They have state laws. They have federal laws. And of course, it's up to the state and prosecutors to do things. It was the Minnesota state prosecutors that charged him with third-degree murder. And it was actually that horrendously bad President Trump, his president's office, that ensured that was upgraded. So they jumped in. So that doesn't take away from the horrendous killing, but the system that you're saying is broken worked. A terrible crime happened, somebody was arrested, and somebody's been charged for that terrible crime and is going to be held accountable. So that's why I suppose I'm a little bit surprised at how it's gone at the moment. And I'm all for. I know I posted something on social media that I didn't support the lighting up of the council building, and that's because I knew they'd only got an email from another council a couple of hours previously. It was an empty gesture, it was a last minute thing, and it's not backed up by actions or deeds. And it's easy to make gestures and harder to take action. And I just think that gesture politics is something that I'm not interested in.
Well, and we know this as well. I think I because I know you quite well, I understand your frustration because I share the frustration. Problem with things like Twitter is there's a limited amount of letters that you can put out there. But the frustration that we both have is that we know that there is some serious problems in Ipswich, especially with county lines, and we have tried our hardest to be a positive difference when it comes to Ipswich. We not so long ago had Tavis Spencer Akings murdered in the streets in broad daylight, and then everything that happened afterwards when it came to funding, when it came to opening a community house and all that, all was kind of like, look at our headlines, we're going to put this amount of money in this place, but we knew that what they did wasn't good enough for that community. It wasn't fit for purpose because the decision makers don't understand that community. So don't then come across and say we're going to light the town hall purple, whatever it was, in support, when actually you're failing that very community that you're saying you're supporting right now. That's where the anger comes from. And I've had this anger for a long time in my, where I live, opening a community house that wasn't fit for purpose, because the first thing they did was fill it with police. If you know anything about a community, then you would never have done that. So the empty gesture, I 100% support you on that, is don't light up a building when you haven't even taken any form of opportunity to really understand the problems that are going on and why the BAME communities are affected differently to the white communities. So I agree with you, and I 100% back you up that it's actually insulting. I'll go as far as saying it's insulting to say now you support that community with a bloody light.
Well, it is, and this is the problem. We've been saying for quite a few years now that the council here has lost the communities, as it were, lost touch with the communities. It lost it's out of touch. And then obviously the horrendous murder in Ipswich happened. More to do with county lines, and then all of a sudden it's let's throw some money here. So you're correct, let's throw some money there. And again, it's reactionary politics.
Yeah.
It's the horse has already bolted. What can we do to appear to be looking to be doing something when actually they weren't proactive in the first place? And I suppose another reason why Conservatives in Ipswich, we tend to attract a bit of criticism like this is because we dare actually speak out about things. Sometimes people tell me all the while, Ian, you shouldn't have said that. But then if I don't say it, nobody else is going to. And also that, in a way, obviously this brings to the fore not an argument, a debate that needs to be had. But one of the biggest debates is the fact that we're allowed to debate about this. Stop throwing insults around to people that don't necessarily hold the same views as you. But then, taken away just the local part at all, I've seen some horrendous pictures this morning of some of the damage and desecration done in other places. And, that happens so often with protest movements, and it doesn't matter what the protest is. It's often hijacked by this unruly element that then takes away and loses the message, because half of the country that this protest movement was trying to get on side will now be against them because of the scenes and the pictures that have that have been shown on people's televisions over the last few days, and it just makes it out to be. And it tars the whole movement with the same brush, which is just not what they intended to do. And I just
But the problem is, Ian, with this is like what is the purpose behind it? There doesn't seem to be any message apart from Black Lives Matter. But it's like, what are you hoping to change? What is the message here? Because I've got some statistics here about, so it is the number of people shot to death by the police in the United States. In 2020 so far, 172 white people have been shot to death by the police. 88 black people. Hispanic, 57. You've got, last year, unarmed police, unarmed people, 9 unarmed black people were killed, 19 unarmed white people were killed. So the statistics are white people in America are killed by police, armed or unarmed, far more than black people. So if the argument is, and this is by the Wall Street Journal, so if the argument is that you're more likely to die being a death by cop, being a black person, the statistics say otherwise. You're more likely to die being a black person in your community because of the way that unfortunately America is, and the fighting and the gangs and everything. You're more likely to die from that. So what is the message here? If we're going against police brutality, which I agree there's obviously a problem, then that should be coming together of all races, all colours, all creeds, because there's obviously a problem. If you're saying that there is institutional racism within the police, then the statistics suggest otherwise. And it might be different depending on states. There is no clear message with this.
But although I wholeheartedly agree with every single statement you've just said and every single statistic you've just said, I think that you could just highlighted it. I'll be honest with you, we don't need a protest movement in this country to protest something from the United States. We've got enough things that need change in our own country. Okay, that police brutality in the States should be so far down our own agenda that it's, especially now, that it's not even on the same page as what we're reading.
But we have a presidential election. The only reason why this is happening now is because there's a presidential election and it's looking likely that Trump is going to be re-elected. I think this is why I'm so against this and so angry, because I genuinely feel the BAME community are being used here as cannon fodder almost. If it is incredibly dangerous in America, to protest is far more dangerous than it is here, and we've seen that with the footage, then why put these vulnerable people who are more likely to die from the pandemic that's going on, who in their interpretation is more likely to die through police brutality, though the statistics prove otherwise, why would you put them in the firing line at this time? And you do that because you're using those communities because there's a presidential election. And that's why I think at this time, and this is why I'm so against this right now, because this is to cause a divide and to anger people in order to vote a certain way. I think all that's going to happen now, it is created a further divide and further tension, because people that are probably maybe closet racists are probably going to be coming out more against it and more frustrated. When you start seeing cenotaphs being graffitied on and things like that, that angers people inside. That doesn't make you a friend and make you think, actually, I'm going to listen to this. Like I said, there's no clear message. There's too much damage. There's obviously a misunderstanding of history. Why you would graffiti all over Abraham Lincoln's statue in London is beyond me. I mean, you can't judge someone from back in the day from today's standards, but if you look at what he did for black civil rights, it was far more at that time than anyone else, and he emancipated black slaves. So if you understood your history, which I would expect if you're going to lead that kind of movement, is you wouldn't be.
But that's my point. This isn't that damage wasn't done by the people in the movement. There was it. That damage is done by people that attach themselves to all kinds of these protests.
But who's organising it?
I do agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying about the message. There is no message. There is no action that needs to happen with this, if you know what I mean. There's no we want this, we want this. It's just and I do think it actually stokes more racial divide. Like I say, I made a non-racist comment on when the Ipswich Council tweeted that they were going to light up the building. I made a non-racist comment, and I must admit, if you see some of the comments that are attached to my tweet and then some of the other people that are commenting on the post, they are horrendously bad. And you kind of like bring out all the closet loons and whatever to say whatever they want to say. And I think you will have an element of people that say, well, everybody should be treated equally. If we really want a true and fair society, then I'll get in trouble for this probably. If you want a true and fair society, then all groups should be treated equally. And groups that aren't BAME will look and say, well, why should you get different treatment? Why should you get this? If we want a society where everything's the same, then everything should be the same. I suppose we're talking about positive discrimination here. I'm against all types of positive discrimination, whether that's trying to get more women into certain positions or trying to get certain minority groups into certain positions. I'm not a fan of that. I realise sometimes it has to happen, but certainly I'm not a fan of that. And I don't think, and that's why, again, it's another reason why partly I'm against it. I look at Extinction Rebellion protests, and every time they have one, it puts people off Extinction Rebellion. And every time somebody has a protest, because they often get hijacked by extremists, they lose the message and they lose the argument, and the normal people in society, the average Joe, Mr. Sensible, whatever, looks at it and then loses any kind of support. And I think exactly the same has happened here, not in Ipswich, because they, like I say, they had a very peaceful protest. But again, even that will have still angered some people. It's my niece's birthday today. We would usually have a family get together, but we won't be having that because we can't all get together in a family because of the mass gathering rules. So what you'll see is that those type of people, that, although they might not have much of an opinion on Black Lives Matter, they'll be, oh, can't believe that. You let that protest take place. So they'll all of a sudden be slightly against this as well. And I think the whole timing of it has just actually brought people out against it rather than brought people for it.
And I mean, and for me, like, let's not forget that it wasn't so long ago that I was on the Cornhill as a speaker of a Stand Up to Racism rally that we had in Ipswich. Yeah, I do whatever I feel I can do at the time. But I'm against this yesterday.
Can I come in there, Sam? Because you were one of a number of speakers in that Stand Up to Racism rally, and you were probably one of the only speakers there that wasn't either an elected official or some part of some group or charity that's connected to the BAME community. You were there kind of like as a private individual. Now, I can't exactly remember when that was. That was tail end of last year, was that? Was that October, November time? But it was a few months ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, this is part of my point. One, we had a stand up to racism event in Ipswich a few months ago. Okay, did we need another similar type event? Okay, but all these virtuous people made lovely gestures at this event, and most of them are in positions where they can do something to enact some kind of change. And I can tell you that there has been no change since that stand up to racism event. All these people that stood up and spouted these lovely words then went back to their day jobs or their councillor jobs or whatever and did exactly the same as what they were doing anyway. They haven't changed anything. They just wanted to appear on a platform and appear to be virtuous and appear to be, look at me, I'm going to bring this amazing change. They say a lot of things, but they don't do it. You know, there's a lot of people attacking me on social media saying, oh, well, what are you going to do to bring change? What are you going to do? So, well, what is anybody doing to bring change? You know, I'm not in power. It's not my job to enact this change. But each few months, we get people standing on a podium saying they're going to do this, and this. It's those people that are failing the community, not me. I'm not in power.
Yeah.
You know, it's every single one of those speakers at that event that said they were going to enact change. I'd love to have them back now and say, explain to the community what you've done in the last 6 months and differently to what you've done before after the last stand up to racism event. And you know.
And can I just say that I have been working incredibly. Like I'm just a member of the public, standing member of the public. I went to speak because I felt that at the time it was a reaction to what was going on in Ipswich, but also I do believe that personally I do my bit. I was part of a group that was doing a Caribbean lunch club to tackle isolation for the over 60s in the BAME community. I've been working at the moment with someone. I've had to take a time off, and we're looking at why community centres cost more in rent in areas of deprivation. So we're doing, we're researching that to see what we can change on that and why that is the case, to stop this areas of deprivation being treated very differently. So I'm beavering away. You're doing this to try and get some equality, but trying to get some changes. And then, like you say, you've got some councillors and leaders who pop up, do a speech, it all sounds great, and then they disappear and you don't hear from them again. It's like, what are you actually doing? And then you can't then go and just light up a building to say you support it when you're letting down those communities. But yeah, I'm glad though in Ipswich I was very, very concerned by how it would turn out yesterday, and that's because we do have county lines issues, we do have gang culture, and I just wondered, I in my gut thought that this was going to turn into something, and I'm just so relieved, glad, and quite proud actually that it wasn't the case in Ipswich, and I was wrong by what my gut feeling would be. And so even though I don't agree with the mass gatherings, I'm glad that it went as well as it could possibly have gone.
Yeah, and that's the same here. I'll be honest, I probably don't share your opinion there, in as much as I never expected it to get ugly in Ipswich, because I know Ipswich people and doesn't tend to be like that in this area. I was more that a civic, the council has a civic duty to set a lead to and they put their the right term, maybe their virtue signalling, they put that above their signalling for keeping to the government guidelines. And with everything that we've been told over the last few weeks and months, for a council to forget about those guidelines when it actually has 140,000 people to look after, of which a small minority were at this protest yesterday, and it was a small minority. If you look at the Ipswich people as a whole, Ipswich Council have kind of like allowed a minority to forego the government guidelines, and that's not what the council should be doing. The council should have found another way. The council should have offered an alternative. The council shouldn't have been seen to be condoning meeting in groups that aren't. Or the council should have put out some kind of wording, some kind of press statement that says why they're allowing that to go ahead and why it's still not a good idea but they didn't do any of that because they were too quick to be seen to be jumping on. Oh, we must jump on this bandwagon.
Yeah.
And again, that's part of my thing, because all those same people now, and I'll be honest, there are so many councillors promoting this event, and they're the same councillors that were absolutely circling like rabid dogs around Dominic Cummings only a couple of weeks ago, who I didn't defend anywhere on social media. I hasten to add. But he's a man who made a decision in very difficult circumstances that was absolutely pilloried for that decision. And now we've got civic leaders and councillors almost inviting people to come to some kind of mass gathering and event, which they know is going to break the lockdown rules far more than that, which was smacks of hypocrisy, smacks of everything that they say that they're against, and is totally wrong and totally gives the wrong message.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, from a personal point of view, as you well know, I've really, really struggled with this lockdown. And, you know, the reason we haven't done this for a while is because my mental health has been shot to pieces because of this. And I just find it really upsetting. Like, the anger that we experienced as Conservatives because of one man and his decision, which he thought was best for his children, was ridiculous. I mean, I even had friends having a go at me who've known me for a long period of time, having a go at me because they needed someone to vent to, and they were so angry with the lockdown situation. And then you see these mass gatherings now, and I feel it kind of just damaged my mental health even more, because I so desperately want my life to go back to normal, just like everyone else. I so desperately need my friends in my life and other human beings, and the isolation is killing me mentally. And
well, I was talking to somebody else who's also self-isolating because of it was somebody who I work with, actually, who's been off for a few weeks because they're in the at-risk category. And I was chatting to them Friday. They called in Friday. We speak to them once a week at work.
Yeah.
And it's very, 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 very similar to what you're saying. That they felt left behind, as it were. They felt, oh, everybody's forgotten about me. They've kind of like done this for this group, done this for this group. They're allowing this group to have a protest and get together and whatever. And who's talking about me? Who's talking about this group of people that are staying at home and have been told to still shield at home away from everybody else, and now now allowed out once a day as long as they're socially distanced. And he actually said to see people condoning that other kind of activity, he said, was like a real smack in the face, because it's almost like the rest of the world is carrying on as normal, and we're still being told, you can't see anybody, you can't go out, you can't do this, you can't do that. And they actually said that they'd felt worse this week than they'd felt any other time. And I'm only, sorry about butting in, but I only said that because I validated the point you're making, that this has made other people feel worse, as it were, because of the lockdown. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've been in a kind of rebellious mood. I haven't actually broken the rules, but, you know, I did go, a shop that I like, a vintage shop that I like, was open. Like I say, it's been almost 12 weeks of pretty much shielding, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go to this shop, and there was no one in there, so it was fine. But it's like, I probably wouldn't have done that a few weeks ago, because I was strict as you like, washing all my food and everything else. And I think I'm coming to that, if no one else cares, then why should I? And I don't like being in that place, because that's not, two wrongs don't make a right. Two wrongs don't make a right. But I went out, got some vinyl record, come back, and painted whilst listening to Genesis, and it was actually very nice. But I wouldn't have done that, and so I've noticed that my own behaviour is changing, and the rebellious, I can't be caged for too long, is now starting to, is coming through, and I don't think that this protest has helped that at all.
No, well, it certainly hasn't. No.
Right, so next subject, because a lot has happened this week. So I'm going to have a little bit of a moan, and I'm going to get this in really, really quickly. And it is about the free school meals. I'm having a real difficulty right now with my politics, and that's because I understand we're in a pandemic. I understand that we have to have some form of socialism right now to get us through, but where is the line? So I saw an article, even though I said I was boycotting the East Anglian Daily Times, I clickbait had to read it, but that's because it was RMP and his opinion piece. He has written a letter, as he does, asking for the free school meals to be extended, the vouchers to be extended through the summer holidays. And I've kind of thought, this is my line. Ian, this is my line. I have felt uncomfortable through the whole process of all this. You can have money, you can have money, you can have money. Why are we doing this? Why are we suggesting, as Conservatives, extending the free school meals to the summer holidays when they would never have had any of that ordinarily?
You'll hear silence from me because I have no idea. It's not a principle that I adhere to. It's not a principle that I agree to. There is no reason, and again, this, I suppose, where is the problem is, I also, if you keep giving people handouts, then they come to expect it.
Exactly.
I don't understand why people that are in that position apparently need more than they would do at a normal time. If you're going to give people free school meal vouchers or the equivalent of during the school holidays, that's going to be something that's very difficult to take away. That's going to be something that's like any benefit. Once you put it in, it's very difficult to stop it. But then if you do that, the next step is going to be, okay, well, if you're paying us this much when the kids are off, you need to be paying us more when the kids are at school, or the other way around. And I don't understand where it's coming from. And to be brutally honest, and this is going to sound crazy, I mean, I don't have children, as you know, but I'm guessing with everything closed, most people should have more money in their pockets than they've usually got.
Yeah.
And if they haven't, you've got to start asking some questions. I personally do not see how any household needs more income than what they would usually have, when the majority of things that they would spend their extra income on, and we know that people on the benefits don't have extra income, but they do have extra. It doesn't all go on food and bills. Why anybody would need extra income at this stage? And at some stage, the word affordability that we've been living on for the last 10 years needs to come into it. And for 10 years, the Conservative policy has been one of affordability. Can the country afford this? Now, undoubted during this pandemic, we've had to do some things that literally the country can't reasonably afford just to keep it going. But at some point, that needs to stop. And we now need to be weaning people off this government help, not weaning more people onto it. Because the more you wean a population onto it, the more lazy they're going to become, and the less people are actually going to go out and do anything. The whole point, we've spent so long getting benefits to a level where it actually pays to work, and which actually puts money in people's pockets to go out to work. And we've got the benefit system in a way where you can't earn too much on benefits. That means you're earning more than somebody that works. We've spent years getting us to that level. Let's not ruin it, because it has worked. It has got a group of longer-term unemployed people off the dole. Universal credit is, yes, it might not be the best implemented benefit in the world, but it is seeing results. It is actually getting results. And so, no, I think this flies against all the policies that have got us here in the first place, that we've spent the last however many years defending in the face of real opposition. So let's not throw this away. And I'll be honest, it is something so small. I mean, and this is the problem, was that the left use this argument, oh, well, it's only £15 a week. It's chicken feed in the grand scheme of things. It is, but then everything's chicken feed in the grand scheme of things. It's the principle that no family should need more now than what they needed before.
Yeah, and also during the summer holidays, if we're not going to be able to do stuff with our children, if we're not going to be able to take them to Pontins, Butlins, wherever, a campsite or anything, you're not going to be spending that money. At the end of the day, children You bring children into this life generally if you can afford it. I understand circumstances change. My circumstances have changed. My disposable income is very different to what it was because of a divorce. I did not have children in a situation where I didn't believe I could afford them. So you have to take some form of responsibility. It should not be the state's responsibility to feed your children. And people get child benefit anyway. Universal credit has been increased during this pandemic, which I was very surprised with, but fine. You're spending less money. Why is a Conservative Member of Parliament pushing for this ludicrous it just feels like virtue signalling, and I know he's one of our own and we shouldn't do blue on blue, but this is ridiculous, and I voted for a Conservative MP and this goes against all my principles and I'm really against it, even though it's this really small thing. It's ticked me off no end.
I don't disagree.
So I had to get that off my chest. I'll probably get in trouble.
Whereas I was quite diplomatic and didn't actually say anything about it.
But it's
because
just,
I've got an elected position, so I probably stand more chance of getting in trouble than you do.
Yeah, true. But I hope to get elected one day, and I think I'll probably get kicked out of the party for being not partisan enough. Right, next. Parliament.
What did we say we were going to do?
Should we talk about Parliament and the whole virtual voting versus MOG, who is getting people back into House of Parliament? So I, as you all know, am disabled. And I do my best to stay in the workplace, and I had to create a small business from home because, unfortunately, because my disability is unpredictable, I was struggling with employment because I used to work in the city, so I am very keen on supporting those with facilities to work from home, to get disabled people into the workplace. I think we've made a massive effort to do this during the pandemic because you have to try and see some form of positives. I was excited to see that Parliament was getting with the times. They were doing remote questions, testing out remote voting, and I thought this could well be something that stays and will give a sign to disabled people that they could actually be in positions of power, and there's going to be the right tools in place to make that accessible. This week, obviously, we're seeing a real push to let's just go back to normal. Even though there are some MPs that are shielding, let's just go back to normal. Let's get rid of it all.
Okay.
And let's go back to normal.
Well, I think, again, I've spent the first part of this podcast saying how council should set an example. And although I don't necessarily agree with the way it's been implemented, this is exactly what the government's doing. This happened at a time when the government was trying to get people to go back to work, was trying to get people to go back to school, was trying to get people to actually say, do you know what? It's not as scary out there as what you're thinking. We must get back. So they've attempted to set the tone, which is exactly what they should do. They've attempted to set the tone, but I think it's been managed horrendously badly, and I think it would have given a much better message out there, which is a message that other companies have tried to give to their staff. The message should have been, let's return if you can, if you're fit and able-bodied, but those of you that need shielding, we will still put everything in place to allow you to do your jobs. My place of work, we've remained open throughout all this. We've still got a big group of people working from home. They're still working from home because most of them are in some kind of at-risk category. But we're allowing them to work from home even though other people have come back. And I think that the government was right to set an example, because a government should set an example. It's what it's there for, should set the way forward. Let's come back to work, let's try and get normality. But it also should have set the example of not forgetting about its people that perhaps aren't as able as others and are in the shielding groups. So it should have made some kind of alternative arrangements for those. And then you've got the best of both worlds. You're showing people that both systems can work. And I'll be honest, it's such an easy change to have. They'd already brought in the electronic voting and stuff. So it seemed to me to be such an easy thing to change. I am a little bit worried now that they're not changing because they're stuck their heels in a little bit, and they're worried about saving face, because the easiest thing to do would be to make a statement and say, okay, cool, For most of us, we're going to still return to Parliament because we think it's the best option and we think it's a good idea. But for those that can't and that don't feel comfortable, we're going to put this in place because that shows them to be a caring employer. And I think then they've answered both camps' questions, and they've kind of like set the stall for to really how responsible companies going forward should be acting. We can't have a blanket rule for all because of the current pandemic. So let's be flexible.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I watched, believe it or not, I watched the debate that was going on in the House of Parliament whilst trying to make some balloon animals with my children. So I was multitasking. It was a disaster. Don't buy cheap balloons. But I was watching it, and Jacob Rees-Mogg makes a compelling argument. I understand where he's coming from. But at the same time, it did feel to me very digging your heels in, being very stubborn, like you say. I'm a member in Suffolk Coastal, so Therese Coffey is our MP. She does regular briefings as such with her members, which I think is a fantastic thing. I think all members of Parliament should be doing it with their members in their associations, and it's a real nice opportunity to speak to an MP directly. It's even nicer, I guess, for us because she is a cabinet minister and it's for Department of Work and Pensions. So I did express my concerns with this myself. She was very warm with receiving the feedback, and I kind of said to her about how it comes across to, the general public, and I'm hoping that she'll take that feedback away. She did make some explanations about how difficult it has been with the remote voting, and how, are people taking these votes seriously if they're just like Jacob Rees-Mogg said, if you're just sitting there watching whatever's on the TV. I don't watch TV anymore, but whatever's on the TV, and then you're just voting, are you really taking those votes seriously? So I can understand that there are concerns, but I did say to her it needs to be expressed. If this is the decision, the general public need to understand where you're coming from, because at the moment it's not really doing the campaign for disabled people in the workplace any, it's doing us a disservice.
But there is one thing I would say about that, and every group has attached themselves to it, is that in normal times, obviously, I would say that we need to be as inclusive with everybody, because I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment. But in normal times, we can be as inclusive with everybody as we possibly can be. But sometimes during this pandemic, you have to make blanket rules and blanket things. And the problem is that as soon as this government's made any kind of rule at all, there'll be some disaffected groups saying, "Oh, but what about me? What about me? What about us? What about us?" And unfortunately, during this kind of crisis, some decisions have to be taken that are unilateral against for the general good rather than that. But the sentiment of sentiment of this, I certainly agree with.
Yeah, and it was well received. And when you have a discussion, the thing I like about Therese the most is that she doesn't use flowery language, and so you kind of the vibe of what she's saying, and what her feelings is about it, because she doesn't really mince her words. And so to have that discussion with someone who has taken that into consideration already and is actually understanding the point of view from someone who isn't in that room at the time, it was really refreshing. It was nice, and I actually feel a little bit more comfortable about it. So I also expressed in the meeting about AGMs, associations, accessibility, because this is again something that I've been talking about ever since I became a member, and having hybrid meetings to make it more accessible for those with disabilities, those with young families and stuff like that, to get more of an engagement. And I'm hoping that the Conservative Party, because we were on Tory Talks, I'm hoping the Conservative Party will learn a lot from this pandemic and make things more accessible, and maybe get with the times a little bit, because it's difficult being a young person in the party sometimes, because a lot of the processes seem to be quite old school. So this is a positive that could come from the pandemic. I'm just hoping we don't go back to normal and ignore all the positives and all the stuff that we've put in place when it comes to accessibility. So that's kind of what I've been working on this week, and trying to turn this absolute, I'm going to say shit show into something that could possibly be a positive outcome. And I'm hoping it's been well received.
Yeah, to be honest, there are lots of things to learn from this. There are some good ways. We've spoken about it before, the new normal. There are lots of ways. There'll be a lot more remote working. going on for everybody. A lot more remote accessibility. A little aside is that they are now recording council meetings for us, so that they're showing them, so it makes them more accessible. But yeah, that's a whole episode all on itself. Accessibility.
Yeah. Right.
Just
Well,
chuck this on, literally.
well, that was quite a busy one for our first one back. So
I think we've come out the other side.
I think we did all right, actually.
Yeah.
So thank you as ever for listening or watching, and we will be back hopefully next week with another episode, so long as I don't go a bit mental again.